your door with your right hand. You actually have to lean across with your left hand, unlock the door, use your right hand to slowly open the door, look over your shoulder, look in your mirrors, double check, make sure there are no cyclists coming, and then open your door. They want all drivers to do this as a matter of course, every single time they open the door. Do you know what's fascinating about this? The BBC has spoken to a Dutch driving instructor who said, why is this a big deal? In Holland, this is how we open our car doors. We've been doing it for years. It's the only sensible way of opening a car door. So it would appear in this country, the Dutch certainly think that we're years behind the fact that we're even discussing this. Well, Cycling UK said that more than 3,000 people every year are hurt by drivers doing this, opening their door when cyclists are passing. And the Department of Transport is saying they'll consider bringing in new legislation or certainly new guidance for drivers to just make drivers think more and more about what cyclists are doing and what needs to be done to make sure they're safer. Notice, though, there is nothing in this about cyclists. The cyclists seem to get off scot-free from this. There's nothing about cyclists paying a bit more attention when they're out cycling. We've already heard this morning that some drivers certainly think it's cyclists who need to improve their behaviour. I want your stories. I want what you've seen in Beds, Herts and Bucks, whether you're a cyclist or a driver. Who is safer? Who causes more danger on the roads? Who's more hazardous? Have you had a confrontation with either a cyclist or a driver? 03459 455 555. Marion in Hemel text on 81333 to say drivers need to pay more attention, full stop. Look out for cyclists, look out for people, look out for kids and animals, and put that mobile phone down. Well, I couldn't agree with you enough on that one. And also, I'll get to Martin's text in a moment. Let me speak to Andy, who has called in to have his say. Morning to you, Andy.
Good morning, Tim.
Good morning. Is it drivers or cyclists, do you think, that need more retraining on the roads, Andy?
Well, I think both do generally, but quite honestly, I do have a problem with cyclists, because I am worried that they are not actually in the main very competent when they're cycling. I mean, the thing is, I see cyclists without crash helmets, which I think they should be compulsory to start with. You see cyclists who go through traffic lights on red routinely when drivers have to wait. And in London, when I go to London, there's so many cyclists. They cut across the traffic, they ignore traffic lights, and generally they are a menace, quite honestly.
I think there's a few problems with cyclists, and they're quite different depending on where you live, and you've already pointed this out. In London, if you go down and do some work in London, you'll find huge numbers of cyclists, and from my experience, they cause the most problems at traffic lights where they try and beat a red light, or they undertake on the left-hand side, trying to go around lorries and things like that, and they can't be seen. When you move out to Beds, Herts and Bucks in our town centres, I think it's generally weaving in stationary traffic that I think is one of the biggest problems with cyclists. Then you go to the countryside round here, and it tends to be people cycling in big groups, going around blind corners in big groups, suddenly find themselves face to face with cars. So I think it differs, doesn't it, depending on where you live or where you work.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the thing is that I think particularly at the weekends, you see cycling groups out, and let's face it, everyone's got a right to go on the road and enjoy themselves, but they do go out in big groups, and they're 2 or 3 abreast at times on roads which are not that wide, and it's very difficult for cars to get past them. I think that they should observe a situation where they don't cycle in 2s and 3s unless it's completely clear. In other words, like they're single file. And also in London, I must say, and this has happened in Hartmaden as well, I've actually been on a crossing the road, and cyclists have gone straight across, practically in front of me, ignoring the crossing. And I think that's diabolical, quite honestly.
Do you, I mean, being honest about this, Anne, do you sometimes feel as though cyclists are just a bit of a menace to you?
I do. I mean, that sounds bad, but I used to be a cyclist myself. But the thing is, I think that because they have no training, if you want to call it that. I mean, when I was young, I did a cycling proficiency test, and we all had to do that before we could cycle. I think there should be a test for cyclists, and I think it's about time they paid something for using the roads as well.
Andy, let me bring someone else into this conversation. Nicholas is from Buckingham. He's called in to have his say. Morning to you, Nicholas.
Good morning.
So Andy has described cyclists, not all of them, but he does have a feeling that cyclists are a bit of a menace, actually, in many respects, because they don't have enough training. What's your take on that?
Well, I can understand his point of view with regards a large group of cyclists. I can see how that could be frustrating to a motorist. In my experience, however, and I've been cycling for many years, most cyclists who are on road bikes take it very seriously. They're doing it for personal fitness and training. They enter sportives, etc. And they are, as a result, very professional in the way that they behave on the roads. And in my experience, cycling around the countryside of Buckinghamshire, I find the motorists to be at fault 9 times out of 10, specifically in never giving enough room when they pass cyclists. And what's happening, I find now, is that cyclists are now fighting back. They're not prepared to put themselves at risk, for want of a better word, because motorists are taking less care. So they ride two abreast, which is essentially the width of a car, in order to slow the cars down and to force the cars to park on the other side of the road. I do agree with a previous caller. I think both sides, cyclists and motorists, need to be aware and all have a duty of care to each other, and they have to behave responsibly. So when a road is narrow, then they must ride in single file. But when there is a road wide enough, I think it's sensible to ride two abreast. And indeed, when I took my own cycling license as a child, it was encouraged, as I recall. So, yeah, that's
so Andy, cyclists are starting to fight back because they're so annoyed and they've lost patience with the fact that motorists drive too close to them and don't give them enough room. Do you have sympathy for that they're actually starting to fight back because of the bad behaviour of motorists?
Well, I think some of, as the caller says, some of the what I call the professional cyclists who have got all the gear and wear helmets, etc. Generally, they're quite well behaved on the roads. It's the cyclists who have got no helmet, who are not very clever on their bikes, have never really ridden professionally, who are a menace, quite honestly, and your caller knows that there are a considerable number of those. You've only got to go out every day into towns.
Do you think that's true, Nicholas? Do you think?
I think going in and out of traffic.
I do agree with you. I think cyclists, I do agree with you, sir. I think that anybody who takes to the bicycle needs to be properly acquainted with the rules. They need to understand the highway code. They must wear a helmet. I can't disagree with that at all. I think they have a responsibility and a duty of care to their fellow motorists, as the motorists do to the cyclists.
Can I put this to you, Nicholas? I'll say thank you. I'll let Andy go. Thank you very much, Andy in Hockenham, for making your point. Nicholas, this whole issue of I think for many people listening today, it's cyclists in the country that they see the most. You know, where we live in Bedford and Bucks, it's generally cyclists we see in the countryside.
Correct.
I am someone who cycles. I've been out with a cycling club. I've got all the gear. I go out regularly when the weather's good, 3 or 4 times a week. And I have got to a position now where I kind of prefer cycling by myself, because actually, when I'm out with a group of people, I am conscious of the fact that we are taking up a huge chunk of the road. And personally, as a cyclist, I find it embarrassing, because I hate cycling for miles with a car right up my backside. If I'm out by myself in the country, I will just pull over and wait for all the cars to go past, then continue, because I think cars have more right to be able to just go down that road than I do, because I can easily pull over.
Well, I think I'm not sure I would agree with you there. I think you're being very generous and considerate. I think that the motorist is unfortunately in this country we don't have enough cycle lanes, unlike Holland, where they're built around them, and they have laws protecting cyclists, as you've demonstrated. I think that you shouldn't feel embarrassed. I think if you're behaving properly, you're properly kitted out, you're not riding irresponsibly, then I think the motorist, you're showing care and consideration to the motorist. And I think the motorist, you deserve the same from the motorist.
But I've been behind. I cycle around the Hertfordshire regularly. I've been behind a cyclist on a really thin single track road. He's been in all the gear, and 2 days before, that had been me. So I'm not someone who doesn't understand. 2 days before, that had been me in all the gear. He cycled in front of me for what must have been about 20 to 25 minutes on a single track road, going without any sense of the fact that he was winding me up, and I was right on the edge of actually using my horn against a fellow cyclist, because I thought to myself, surely he can see if he just pulls over for 1 second, I can go, and he can carry on.
Yeah, I suppose you have to ask yourself, well, what was the condition of the road? Riding to the left of the road, can be dangerous because of the potholes. Was it windy? Was he riding a full carbon bike? And if he was, the slightest bit of wind that might be come through a hedge can blow him off the bike. So he may not have had any choice. I don't know what the situation was, but I find myself doing something similar. This weekend, it was very, very windy, pouring with rain, a very dangerous part of the road where there was ruts all over the place. It was safer for me to ride in the middle of the road because the cars were driving, ignoring the conditions of the road and making it quite dangerous for me. So, I think, and also if you're on a bike, it's not often difficult to hear what's behind you because of all the wind, particularly this time of year. Well, I think that a lot of motorists, you drive a car, but you also cycle, so you're probably more sensitive to these issues. But a lot of motorists don't ride a bike, and they're not aware of the conditions in which a cyclist can find themselves in.
Thank you very much, Nicholas in Buckingham, for having you also on 03459 455 555. Martin says, cyclists need more safety awareness training. You buy a bicycle, you can ride it straight away. But you're trained to drive a car properly. Also, cars do not drive three abreast or hop on and off of pavements. Thank you very much, Martin. Will in Henlow says, I'm a farmer. Trying to overtake a cyclist with a 40-foot tractor and a trailer is near impossible on today's busy roads. They know you're there, but they won't stop for 10 seconds. I've only ever had one person pull over. Will, it was probably me. I'm being absolutely serious, Will. It was probably me. Because I've not met many other cyclists who agree with me about this issue of pulling over. I'm not a perfect cyclist. I occasionally get things wrong. I'll be honest, in the past, I've jumped a red light because I thought I wanted to get in front of the traffic. I thought it was safer for me. I don't do it anymore, but I've made all those mistakes. But in terms of pulling over, Will, you're absolutely right. You will find, I think, 99 in 100 cyclists will happily let you sit behind them. There is the one that will think, you know what, I'll just stop my ride, pull over, let them go past, feet into the verge, but your left foot out, go into the verge, don't worry. You won't find people that do that. Jeanette Miller is president of the Association of Motor Offence Lawyers. Good morning to you, Jeanette.
Morning.
Is this a big problem in terms of motoring offences, people opening their doors and hitting cyclists? Is this very much a live issue for you?
I have come across it. I've actually been in a vehicle myself when I first passed my test and my passenger did it. So I've been very well aware as a motorist of the need to be super cautious and alert to the possibility of cyclists going past.
Did they hurt someone?
Sorry?
Did they hurt someone?
Well, the cyclists seem to be quite annoyed, but thankfully not hurt. But I have come across cyclists who have been seriously hurt. Obviously, they're coming at some speed, and if a door is opened onto them sometimes, and then obviously that can cause quite serious injury. But in terms of motoring offences, it's not something that I've come across that often. That sadly, the more common offences involving cyclists tend to be involving cycling and motorists colliding in a more traditional sense when both vehicles are moving.
Do you think that the current status quo, whereby drivers have a great deal of responsibility for a vehicle that, weighs a ton. They have to do training before they can be in that vehicle. They pay various taxes and insurance policies to be on the roads. And then you have cyclists interacting with them, weaving through them, undertaking them. Do you think that status quo is fundamentally unfair at the moment, and it's unfair on motorists?
I can see how motorists might perceive it in that way, but ultimately we have to remember that when you're behind the wheel of a car or other vehicle, you effectively have a weapon in your hands, and you can cause very, very serious damage if you don't use that vehicle correctly and you're not considerate to other people, either pedestrians or cyclists also using the road, who are much more vulnerable just simply because they don't have the protection of the vehicle around them. Now, in some respects, I think there is sense in suggesting that cyclists need to perhaps overcome more safety training, and they need to demonstrate that they are fit to use the roads. But at the same time, we're also encouraging more cyclists than ever before, for environmental reasons. So, on the one hand, I can understand motorists getting a bit naffed off seeing cyclists who clearly don't have regard for the highway code and their own and other safety. But at the same time, if we make it too hard for cyclists and too expensive for cyclists to use the road, then we're cutting off our noses to spite our face with regards to climate change and all the other consequences of using vehicles.
I guess a lot of this is down to the extent to which cyclists are putting themselves at excessive risk. Because as a cyclist, I routinely see other cyclists who I think are doing things that are simply too risky. They might think it's perfectly fine for them to do it because they have a right to cycle on the roads. But in slow-moving traffic where you're restricted to 20 or 30 in that area anywhere on the high street, the cyclists often think, well, do you know what, this is brilliant because I can just whiz down the side of these cars, probably doing about 17, 18 or sometimes even 20 themselves. And realistically speaking, just because you can go really fast on a bike and overtake people, maybe cyclists need to think twice about doing it, because the fact is they should know a door can open at any time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, unfortunately, there are a minority of cyclists who don't have regard for the highway code, and there are offences that would capture sometimes the behaviour that you're describing, but perhaps the deterrent from them is not going to be enough. And I think a lot of cyclists may consider themselves to be, infallible, and they're not until something happens to them. Perhaps that they're prepared to take those risks. And
I suppose the thing is with cyclists and drivers, every day you see cyclists and drivers doing things that puts themselves at risk. But the fact is, most cyclists and most drivers go day after day after day without having any problems. And I think that you probably see the same in cars with using mobile phones. You get to a point where you feel so confident on autopilot that you are in control, that actually you are really surprised when something does go wrong, because so often you can cycle around without any problems at all. I think it's complacency probably is part of the problem. Thank you very much, Jeanette Miller, who's president of the Association of Motor Offence Lawyers. Graham in Sheffield